Have you ever wondered how a country's legal system comes to be? Well, South Africa's is one of the most fascinating in the world. It's not just one system, it's a stack of historical layers. To really get what's happening today, we've got to peel back those layers one by one, from ancient customs all the way to the modern constitution. So let's get into it.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll talk about why any of this history stuff actually matters. Then, we're going to walk through 5 key phases. We'll start with the original customary law, then see how European influence from both the Dutch and the British added new layers. After that, we have to look at the dark chapter of apartheid law and then the incredible transition to a constitutional democracy. Finally, we'll see how all these threads are woven together today.
Okay, first things first. Why are we digging into the past? I mean, shouldn't we just focus on the laws we have now? Well, the thing about law is that the past is never really past. It's very much alive, and it's shaping legal decisions being made today.
And this isn't just an academic exercise, right? Understanding this history explains why our laws look the way they do right now. And if you want to make things better, you first have to understand how they got this way. It's what we call living law. Our common law is built on centuries of decisions. It also shows how connected we are to other parts of the world. For example, if you look at South Africa's Companies Act today, you'll see the fingerprints of English law all over it.
All right, let's go to phase 1. We have to rewind the clock, way back before any European settlers arrived. Long before that, South Africa was a land governed by its own complex legal traditions. We call this customary law, and it is the true foundation of everything that came after.
Now, customary law is really different from what we might think of as law today. It wasn't written down in big books. It was a living tradition, passed down through stories and oral history from generation to generation. It wasn't one size fits all either. It changed depending on the tribe in the area. And here's the most important part. It was all about the community. The goal was group harmony, not just individual rights. The sad part is, because it was unwritten, and because colonists actively ignored or tried to erase it, a lot of its detailed history has been lost.
Okay, so now we get to the next 2 phases, where things get really complicated. This is when European powers arrive, and they don't just add a thin coat of paint. They add thick, transformative layers of law that would change South Africa forever.
You really need to remember these 2 dates. In 1652, Jan van Riebeeck and the Dutch East India Company set up shop at the Cape. Now, their goal wasn't to build a colony at first, but simply a pit stop for their ships. But then, in 1806, everything changes again when the British take control, kicking off a whole new era of legal influence.
So you might be asking, how did the Dutch justify taking land that was clearly already inhabited? Well, they used a powerful and frankly devastating legal idea from the time, res nullius. It's Latin for nobody's thing. The logic was, if they declared the people living there to be uncivilized, then, in their eyes, the land had no legal owner. It was a legal fiction that allowed them to claim it. This idea of empty land would cast a very, very long shadow.
Now, the law the Dutch brought with them wasn't simple. It was a fascinating hybrid known as Roman Dutch law. Think of it like a legal cocktail. The base was the sophisticated law of ancient Rome, and mixed into that were the local customs and laws from Holland in the 17th century. And that blend is what became the Law of the Cape.
And just to give you a sense of how deep these roots go, the Roman part of Roman Dutch law wasn't new. It was ancient. It had been developing for over 1,000 years, evolving as Rome itself changed from a monarchy to a republic and finally into a massive empire. So how did a legal system from ancient Rome end up in 17th century Holland? The answer lies in this incredible collection, the Corpus Juris Civilis, which means body of civil law. In the 6th century, Emperor Justinian decided to collect and organize all of Roman law into one massive text. It was like a legal time capsule, perfectly preserving Roman legal genius for centuries.
Hundreds of years later, European scholars rediscovered this text, and it caused a revolution. This period is known as the reception of Roman law. Starting around the 12th century, universities all over Europe began studying the Corpus Juris Civilis and mixing its principles with their own local laws. This created a whole family of legal systems, including the one in Holland that would eventually make its way to South Africa.
So we have customary law, then Roman Dutch law, and then comes the third major layer. When the British took over in 1806, they made a really crucial decision. They didn't scrap the existing Roman Dutch system. Instead, they just started adding their own English law on top of it, especially in areas like business law and how courts operate. This is the moment South Africa's legal system becomes this incredibly complex hybrid we see today.
And now we come to the 4th phase. This is a period where the very idea of law was twisted.
It stopped being a tool for justice and was turned into a weapon for systematic oppression. This, of course, was the era of apartheid.
From 1948 on, the government used the law to engineer a society based on racial segregation. These laws controlled everything. The Group Areas Act told you where you were allowed to live. The Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act told you who you were allowed to love. The Separate Amenities Act segregated every public space, from beaches to benches. And the Bantu Education Act was designed to give Black South Africans an inferior education to limit their opportunities. The law invaded every part of human life.
So, it's so important to understand this wasn't just about keeping people separate. The entire legal system of apartheid was a machine designed for taking away land, stripping people of their basic freedoms, and destroying any chance they had at a better future. It took that old colonial idea of res nullius, of nobody's land, to its most brutal and logical conclusion. And, while all this was happening, there was this big debate going on inside the white legal community. They called it the modernists versus the purists, arguing about whether Roman Dutch law should be mixed with more English law or kept pure. But the most shocking thing about this debate is what they weren't talking about. While they argued over which European legal tradition was superior, the rights, the laws, and the very humanity of Black South Africans were completely ignored.
But after decades of pain and struggle, we reach the fifth phase, the fall of apartheid and the birth of a completely new legal order. One built not on division, but on human rights, dignity, and equality for all.
So what finally broke the system? It was a combination of immense pressure from all sides. The world responded with sanctions that squeezed the economy. Inside the country, liberation movements like the ANC and PAC led a powerful resistance. And then came the moment that changed everything, the unbanning of those movements and the release of Nelson Mandela from prison.
The early 1990s were just a whirlwind of historic change. In 1990, Mandela walks free. That kicks off years of intense negotiations, leading to an interim constitution in 1993. And finally, the climax. In 1996, the final constitution is adopted, establishing a new foundation for the entire country.
So, after all that history, what are we left with today? Well, we have this incredible, rich, and complicated legal tapestry, woven from all those different threads we just talked about. So to break it down simply, today's system pulls from three main sources. You still have customary law, the original law of the land, which is now protected by the Constitution. You have Roman Dutch law, which is the bedrock of so much of our common law, like contracts and property. And then you have English law, which still has a huge influence on things like corporate law and how our courts work. They all exist together.
And if you take away only one thing, make it this. There is now one law that rules them all, the Constitution. It is the ultimate test. It doesn't matter if a rule comes from customary law, Roman Dutch law, or English law. If it clashes with the rights and values in the Constitution, it's invalid. End of story. That's what it means to be a constitutional democracy.
And so that brings us to the big question for today. When you have a legal system built on these layers, indigenous tradition, colonial laws, a system of oppression, and now a new vision of human rights, how does that incredibly complex past affect the fight for true justice and equality in South Africa right now?